Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Up Life on Fire podcast. And today is a very special episode. This is our 50th episode for our podcast, and we are very, very excited to have managed to make that mark and to now be able to have sponsors and advertising in our podcast that will help us raise funds for Battle to Be, our 501c3 nonprofit organization that serves those who serve country and community. So this podcast is an excellent way for you to support our program. And we're out here providing you guys free access to all kinds of amazing people, awesome stories of trauma recovery, and giving you the resources and tools to take actionable steps on your pathway for recovery and your healing journey. So if you guys out there appreciate what we're doing and want us to be able to continue to provide these resources for you, please like, share, comment. We love seeing what you guys want to see from us, what you want to hear from us, who you think we should interview. And there is a button that you will find at the bottom of this podcast that says support this podcast. Please feel free to do that. Any amount helps. Never feel bad if you can only do $1, because $1 super adds up. If you think about the power of social media, we have hundreds of thousands of people out there that see this. So if every single person donated just a single dollar, that would add $100,000 or more to our working budget every year. And the amount of impact that $100,000 makes on our end users is tremendous, because we are a nonprofit organization that doesn't have a whole bunch of administrative fees. We don't pay anyone on our staff. Everyone is volunteers, including myself. So literally all of that money goes to funding the programs for our end users. It provides PTSD treatment and therapies. It provides free online courses that people can take. It provides resources for organizations to set up entire new systems that build up instead of tear down the lives of our first responders. So please know that even if only a small amount is able to be done, it makes a huge difference. So together we can do this. If we stand alone, we're just a drop in the ocean. Together we create a tidal wave of change. So let's get the conversation going so that we can really expand on our understanding that first responders are human too. We all have emotions. We all have experiences that are challenging for us. And the more that we talk about that, the more that we realize that the warrior mentality of just suck it up and you can't feel anything is a detriment to us all. The more that we break down these barriers and realize that if we focus on mental health maintenance instead of just focusing on the back end of mental health recovery when it's too late, we can actually transform this problem. We can actually bring back lives. We can actually increase the quality of lives. So today I want to bring you an amazing guest who has a background as a veteran, an Army veteran, federal law enforcement officer, and is currently working in corrections, a mental health advocate who speaks and has his own framework for healing, Daniel Torrez. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited. I love all of these connections that I get to make through other people. And LinkedIn has been an astonishing place to meet people with fantastic stories. So let's begin where I always begin with, tell me a little bit about your young life. What was your childhood like?
Very good. Yeah, my childhood was, I would say it was fairly normal. Grew up here on the west side of Phoenix in Arizona. And, my mom was a stay-at-home mom until I went into junior high or middle school now. It tells you how old I am. I called it junior high. And I had two older brothers and a younger sister. Dad was working. And, growing up, I used to watch them old school cop shows, like One Adam 12, Emergency 51, even, the old SWAT. And of course, my favorite was Chips with Punch and John. I favored myself to be like Punch, because he kind of looked like me. Of course, back in the day, I didn't have as much gray. But, I always thought maybe, I want to be a police officer or a firefighter because both career fields, excited me, especially watching all those TV shows. So I was a normal kid, just growing up, did a lot of sports. And then, I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, became a troubled youth. And it actually took me 5 years plus summer school to graduate high school. But I wanted to join the Army because I finally decided I wanted to be a police officer here in Phoenix. So you have to be 21 to join the academy. So I said, well, I'll join the Army, get some experience, maybe travel the world a little bit, come back home and become a cop here in Phoenix, my hometown. And then when I was in high school, I don't really consider that I had childhood trauma because if you look at my ACE score, the adverse childhood experience score, it's a big fat 0. But when I was 16, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and when I was 18, he passed away, and he passed away about 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave to join the Army to be a military police officer. And a few days before he passed, I had a chat with him, because I was the youngest son. So anytime we would go, hunting, fishing, camping, it would always be me and my dad, and then my 2 older brothers would go out by themselves. So I felt I was fairly close to my dad, and always looked up to him, and I think he was a great role model, not only as a man, but as a husband and a father. And I told him I could get out of my enlistment, because of the situation. And he said, nope, Torrez never quits. It's time for you to go out there, be a man, join the Army. He was in the Army himself back in the day. And at the time, one of my older brothers was in the Army as well, too. So, kind of a military family. So I left. And when he passed away, I was there that morning. He passed away at home in his sleep. So I had to call my 2 older brothers. They were off at work. It was in summertime. So I was home at school with my younger sister and my mom, and I didn't cry when he passed away. I didn't cry at his funeral because I figured, I'm good to go. I got to be strong for my family. And then 3 weeks later, I'm at, basic training to become a Army military police officer. And it was just during training, I remember, it was like you said, that suck it up and drive on mentality, that warrior spirit. One of the things that sticks out, Army basic training, hey, you got to suck it up. Pain is only weakness leaving the body. And then we got into military police training, and I remember specifically it was on, responding to a domestic violence event, which can be pretty hairy, pretty dangerous. And they were showing some pretty graphic images on the screen, and a couple of my fellow trainees ended up leaving the room. One of them actually threw up. The other one was just like, couldn't handle it. I think he started crying. And I just remember the drill sergeant saying, those 2 guys aren't going to make it. If you're going to be a good military police officer, you can't show emotion. You can't let things get to you. You have to have thick skin. And I was like, can't show emotion. I said, well, I'm pretty good at that right now because I have not shown any emotion about my dad's death. I didn't process it. I didn't grieve. I was just angry, and I was all in. It was 1985, so it was, be all you can be, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to, I wanted to succeed, and become a soldier and become a military police officer. So I went through that training, and and that just stuck with me. And I never really processed my dad's death in those early days or years in the military. So I complete my training. I become a military police officer. I'm gung ho. I'm ready to go save the world. I go to my first duty station, and I'm just out there on patrol, and thinking I'm doing great things. I I enjoyed my job, enjoyed the people I met. And then, I had my first critical incident, I guess you could say. I had to respond to a medical emergency. And I got there before the firefighters or the paramedics. And it was a young woman screaming when I entered the quarters. It was in the housing area. She's like, save my baby, save my baby. And I look, and there's a young girl on the couch. And, just by training and life experience, even at that young age of 19, I said, I don't think this young girl is still living. But I just remember the mother screaming, help my baby, help my baby. So I removed the child, put her on the carpet, and started performing life-saving measures. I started doing CPR, even though I knew based on the touch, the feel of the skin, and there was no pulse, but I continued CPR. And as soon as I started CPR on that young girl, the mother stopped saying, save my baby, to thank you. So I felt I did something good for that young mother. But what got me was when my dad passed away from cancer, and I found him in his bed, there was a smell of death. I just call it the smell of death in the room. And I had that same smell when I was performing CPR on that young girl. And it took me right back to my dad. And I was like, oh man, what's going on here? So the firefighters show up, they take over. Actually, they walk in and they're like looking at me like, dude, what are you doing? Because I think they could tell this young girl was already deceased. But I glanced over at the young mother, and they looked at her, and they jumped in. They started doing life-saving measures, put her on the gurney, and took her out in the ambulance. So I get all the information from the mother to do my report, and done deal. I go back to the MP station and turn in my report. Desk sergeant's like, good job. Get back out on patrol. There was no debrief, no SISM, no, hey, do you need to talk to anybody about what just happened, what you experienced? And I was, it was just get back out on the road. I'm like, okay, cool. So I just start tucking it away, like we do in the military and first responder professions. And so that was probably 3 months. So it would have been about 9 months after my dad died, 3 months after I graduated, with my MP badge. And I'm just running and gunning. I got selected to go to the equivalent of SWAT training, as a young private. Being trained by former Delta Force operators, and learning how to be a SWAT officer. And, I think I'm doing pretty good. I like this Army stuff. I like being an MP. And, a few months later, we had a young MP that was killed in the line of duty death. And it wasn't anything, well, I don't want to say not horrific, but it was a horrible death, of course. But it was a flooding situation. We were out, all the MPs were going out, start doing traffic control and help people stranded because of the flood. And she got swept away by the flood in a drainage ditch. And they found her the next day. And it was the same thing, it was like, wow, I didn't really know her. She was in a different MP company, but I would see her in the chow hall, that's why she was an acquaintance, or during shift change at the MP station, so her death happened. And then I think there was a battalion memorial, but there was nobody there saying, hey, does anybody want to talk about it? Does anybody need to talk about this? One of your fellow MPs was killed. So there was no debriefing or anything, and this was 86. And I just keep going along. And then finally, I'm angry. I'm acting out. I'm reacting negatively to the trauma that I'm suppressing, the grief that I'm not, showing. And I was drinking, and I was smoking, and I was doing high risk behaviors. And I was just, but I was still doing my job. I was good at my job. And finally I said, yeah, it's been about 6 months, since I got there, which now would be about a year after my dad passed. And, still not processing that. So I said, I grew up Roman Catholic, went to church every, did all the catechism and all that, and First Holy Communion. So I said, well, I need to talk to somebody. So I go to my team leader, and he's like, whatever, dude, go talk to whoever you need to talk to. So I made an appointment with the chaplain, our battalion chaplain. And so I go see him, and I go in there, I pour my heart out, say, my dad passed away about a year ago, and I'm just angry and all this stuff. So he grabs a pamphlet off his desk and gives it to me and says, well, read this. If you got any questions, come back and talk to me. And I said, wow. I said, so I figured, who better to give me a young troop in some, I'm having some issues. I'm seeking some guidance. And I'm like, well, who better to trust to give me guidance than a Catholic chaplain? And then I go there, and he gives me this pamphlet. So I walked out, I threw the pamphlet away, and I said, cool. So I go right back to doing what I'm doing, drinking, smoking, high risk behavior, angry, still not processing or showing any emotions, a couple more critical incidents here and there. And, I'm just doing my job. But I'm, those high risk behaviors, a lot of drinking, and it just wasn't working. So I said, I got to figure this out. This is not going to be sustainable. And so I go back to the chaplain, make another appointment. Doesn't remember me. It's about 2 or 3 months later.
Right.
And so I pour my heart out again, and I have some additional stuff to tell him. And at least this time he reaches back and gets me an actual book. It was a hardcover book. And he's like, well, take a look at this book, read this book. It's on, how to grieve the loss of a loved one. He's like, read this book, and if you got any more questions, come see me. I said, all right, cool. So I leave his office again, throw the book away, didn't even, turn a page. And I go right back to those negative reactions, angry, drinking, smoking, just doing what I do. Then my career just takes off. But that set the trajectory, I think, for me at that time. It was, don't show any emotion, because it doesn't matter if you do anyway, especially if you go to somebody you trust, and so, that set my trajectory for I would say my entire career for decades. Never really processed my grief or any emotions relating to my dad's death. Then I just have these different moments in my career, where I'm deploying, I'm going to different places to do different things. And I really enjoyed my job. I loved being a tactical military police more so than the law enforcement side. When we were working the road, it was like, that's cool, being on patrol, back thinking on punch, from back in the day. So another incident that just kind of keeps bringing me back to my dad was we deployed to Mombasa, Kenya. And we were helping the Air Force. We were providing airfield security. And then I was able to go into Somalia with the Air Force combat controllers and a Navy corpsman or an SF medic. And basically we would be dropped off. The Air Force guys would set up their satellite equipment, and basically we were guiding the aircraft. Well, they were guiding the aircraft in. I was there as additional security. But we were in civilian clothes. We had one weapon each, some rations, and our mission was to ensure that satellite equipment was taken care of, and to ensure that the aircraft, when it landed to drop off the relief food, was taken care of. So I'm doing that. We're working 12-hour shifts at the airfield, but it was all right. We were staying at a 4-star hotel in Mombasa, Kenya. I had my own room because I was a squad leader. But one day we're leaving the airfield to go to our hotel after our shift, and there was a traffic accident. We come upon a traffic accident. So, of course, we're good Americans. I say, pull over. I start directing my crew, because I was a senior person there, to, do traffic control so we can see what's going on. There's an individual in the road bleeding, so we start rendering first aid there. We put our gloves on, and because it is Mombasa, Kenya, and by this time it was 1992. And a lot of people say, the AIDS epidemic started in Mombasa, Kenya. So as we're doing first aid on the individual on the road, they start telling us that, hey, the car that hit him is in the water down below. And it's like this, 15-foot embankment. And I look over and I said, I don't see no car. So it was fairly deep, and it was murky water anyway. So they're like, the guy's still in the car. Somebody's got to get him. And everybody starts looking around. And I'm like, yeah, somebody should go get that guy. So being a good American and the senior person there, I dive into the water. I feel the car. It's about 15 feet in, underwater. And I feel there's an individual in the driver's seat. I couldn't get him out the driver's side. So I had to come back up a couple times, catch my breath. And then finally I pulled the driver over the driver's seat and out through the right rear passenger door, get him up, out of the water. And me and my troops get him up the embankment, up on the sidewalk. And I could tell the individual had already been submerged for too long and was already deceased. But again, being there as the good Americans, showing them that we care. So I started performing CPR on this individual. And I'm looking at my hands, my gloves are still on, but they're cut. I got cuts on my hands. I'm bleeding. He's bleeding, other bodily fluids coming out. So I started doing CPR on him, and I know he's already deceased. So that takes me back to the young girl, which takes me back to my dad, and it just keeps multiplying. And all this time in my career, I'm just compartmentalizing all that stuff or suppressing, as my lovely wife says. But compartmentalize is I don't know, I guess it's a sexier word. So I just keep compartmentalizing everything that happens. And, then, I was in Desert Storm, I was in Panama, and just different places, doing different things and seeing different things. And I never processed it. I never stepped back and said, hey, are you okay, to myself? Because as a leader, and as I went up in rank, my responsibilities grew. So it was always about my troops or my team. And, I would ask them, hey, if we had to see something or did something that was, that we need to talk about, I'd ask them. But I was fortunate as a young corporal at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I went to Ranger School. And at the time, there weren't a whole lot of military police that were Rangers unless they were previously infantrymen or something like that. So once I came back from Ranger School, I didn't have a rank anymore. Everybody just called me Ranger Torrez. And I don't think anybody expected Ranger Torrez to ever have emotions or, need help or needed to talk to somebody because, he's Ranger Torrez. So I always tried to make sure that my troops were squared away in that regard, their physical and mental health. But I never did anything for myself other than those, reacting negatively, which was drinking, high risk behavior. I stopped smoking because, when I was a young trooper at Fort Hood, my first duty station, it was cool to smoke Swisher Sweets when you drank, but I didn't really find smoking to be any fun. But I was still drinking, definitely still drinking. So life happens, and I just keep compartmentalizing everything, and it just kept going until I finally, years later, realized that I got to do something.
Let me stop you there for just a second.
Okay.
I want to backtrack a little bit. You talked about your ACE score, so obviously you're aware of that. So that's adverse childhood experiences. It is a questionnaire that talks about some things that can happen to you as a child, and the cumulative score kind of determines how much trauma you've had in your life and what's the likelihood that you're vulnerable to having post-traumatic stress already, and your likelihood to be vulnerable to having post-traumatic stress in a first responder field. So there is actually talk that there will be chronic illness or long-term illness will be added to that. They are aware that that's a situation that does apply. So hopefully the community, the psychology community, will catch up. It's a very slow moving mechanism, unfortunately, to what we see in the real world. It takes 30 years for the psychology field to catch up to what we already know and understand as providers. So sadly, like the medical world, it is very, very slow to start publishing for the general public the stuff that is being talked about slowly and subtly in the background of the medical journals. But also, you talk about reaching out to someone that you felt like you should be able to trust and having a negative experience with that. That is something that we find so many of the people that come to us at Battle to Be have that experience where they've gone to a therapist and the therapist made an error or wasn't trauma safe or wasn't aware of military or first responder culture, and they make an error and say something like, "Oh my gosh, how could you do that?" Or they judged, or they say something that makes the client feel judged, um, and it causes a withdrawal, and the person never seeks out any other additional help. So the one thing that I want to really reinforce here is that there are thousands upon thousands of different ways to receive help. And there are so many different healing modalities that there is something that will work for you. There is something that will help you. If you feel like you need help and you take the first step to reach out, don't let one person's lack of ability or one person's lack of understanding hold you back from seeking something else. Because if you've come to that point where you know you need it, it's very, very true that you need it.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And I think the medical thing, you hit it right on the head because, I think part of the ACEs study is that they're seeing that people that have higher scores on their ACE score later in life are experiencing, medical issues. And like I said, mine's a 0. And yeah, I got issues with my heart, I got high blood pressure. And I think a lot of that is that cumulative trauma that I've experienced, that my body's telling me, hey, bro, you need to do something. And with I wish, if I would have been smarter, or if I could tell my younger self something to kind of change my trajectory, it would be, okay, the chaplain was a 2-time go to somebody else. But I didn't see it like that then. And one time I presented my story at a conference, and afterwards a young firefighter came up to me and asked me, he goes, you mentioned that you went to somebody that you trusted for help or for guidance. He's like, what was one thing that you think would have helped you on your trajectory? And I told him, I didn't even skip a beat. I just answered. I said, if there was somebody who would have listened to me non-judgmentally, I think that would have changed my trajectory. And I emphasize that I should have went to look for somebody else, because like you said, there's thousands of different, types of people that can help and different types of healing modalities. And it took the downward spiral here just a couple of years ago for me to finally see that point. And, I'm happy to say that I've been seeing a licensed clinical social worker, LCSW, for a couple months now. And that's the first person outside of going to that chaplain that I've ever asked for support. And, I was 19 when that happened, and I qualify for the Denny's senior discount now. So it definitely took me way too long to ask for that support. So I would like to make that point very clear, that it doesn't matter what rank you are, what position you hold, what certifications you have. We all see things, and it's okay for us to, react normally to abnormal situations. And if a lot of people don't like I need help. So that's why sometimes I'll just frame it as, I need a support, and we gotta support the fight. And part of that fight may be something that's internal to you. So it's okay to reach out for support.
right. We're working on changing some terminology. So in our world, because I'm a research fellow, so I've been in the PTSD world of academia, and there's some arguments that we talk about PTSD as if it's a singular entity, and as if it is like the thing. But what we're really talking about is an entire spectrum of occupational traumatic stress. And there's this whole realm of trouble that happens before PTSD diagnosis. So what we really want to be doing is focusing on all of these symptoms that happen before that. when the coping skills and the coping mechanisms are starting to come into play in an unhealthy way. So we want to address it from the very beginning of employment. We want to address it from you echoed a story that so many people have told me, that first you didn't know what was happening to you. You didn't recognize the signs and symptoms of occupational traumatic stress at all. Like, you didn't recognize this trauma reactivity happening in yourself because nobody bothered to tell you this is inevitable in your job position. You're going to experience this stuff, and this is how your body is going to react. This is how your psyche is going to react. You're going to have these thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and that's normal and acceptable and expected. So when that starts happening to you, if that starts happening to you, but it happens to us all, I don't think there's a first responder that can say they don't have any trauma reactivity symptoms at all. So if we address it as it's part of the job, and we need to educate people coming in to what they're going to see and how they can address it in different ways, the basics. How can you recognize and control your thoughts, feelings, and emotions in ways that are more healthy? How can you take responsibility for where you are in your life in this moment and not think that the world is happening to you so that you're powerless to handle all of this? How do you recognize when you're hurting and recognize when you're taking that out on other people in unhealthy ways so that you can actually process it in a healthy way? There's so many things that can be addressed through simple psychoeducation that doesn't need a therapist, and through coaching and consulting and all these different levels of support, peer support. Chaplains too, they're starting to be trained more in how to handle post-traumatic stress and occupational traumatic stress. So if we establish all these different degrees of resources, everyone says, oh, well, that's a whole system restructure. That's going to be so expensive and nobody's going to put in the time and effort to implement these systems. But if we actually look at the cost of post-traumatic stress in our whole communities, not even just our military and first responder communities, if we actually look at the budget that's being allocated for antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and EMDR, if we just look at that, we're talking about, $400 billion. It's a horrific number if you look at that. So if we can reduce that number by half by hitting it from the front end instead of the back end, and use less expensive services, and just implement some team resources, regular mental health awareness stuff every single week. Just have a check-in that says, were there any calls that were really challenging for you? Have a 1 to 10 scale. How was your day today? Was there anything that you need a little debriefing for, or would you like resources to be available to you? Just make it normal and natural, and implement these lower level structures so that we're not seeing people reaching out for a therapy appointment and not being able to be seen for 4 months when they're suicidal because there's not enough people to cover the need. If someone's reaching out because they're suicidal, they need help now, not in 4 months.
Yeah, that absolutely correct.
And right, we're telling them they're not important, and that's not okay.
Right.
So do you think it would have changed anything for you if in the early training days you would have been given a set of tools and resources and people would have talked to you about what this looks like?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why now I know training is a lot different now, even in the military. But I know for first responders, firefighters and everybody else, police, EMS, and dispatchers, there's the talk about it. It's like, hey, you're probably going to see some stuff if you ever need to talk to somebody. But I think we can expand on that. And I think part of it is looking back at each individual's, trauma or life experiences prior to becoming a soldier, firefighter, police officer, because I think that's going to play into it, because I think it did for me. But part of it too is when you do reach out, if you don't find the right fit, keep trying to find the right fit, because I've spoken with different people, and I had a firefighter that went to a therapist for the first time, and during intake he kind of shared some stuff and things he saw, and the therapist was like, man, well, if you don't want to experience that stuff, maybe you need to try a different line of work. and the firefighter was like, okay, well, thanks, thanks for the intake. He never went back.
Right.
Or I've spoken with a police officer that, he went to his first, intake with the therapist in uniform. He had all his gear and he had his sidearm, and he goes in the office and the therapist says, well, before we can start, you need to put your weapons away. And he's like, well, I just came because of this. I really need to talk to someone. And he said, okay, I'll go put my stuff in the trunk of my car. He went and he left and never went back. So finding those helping professionals that are, that are aware, like you said, of what military and first responders experience and see on a daily basis sometimes is really part of it. And I know there's a lot of different, trainings and certifications that therapists and counselors, or like you said, coaches and people can have. And it's really finding a fit for you and doing your research. And a lot of times I think that's a hindrance, we need things now. And, why should I have to look up somebody on, Psychology Today to see if they're a good fit for me? They should just be a good fit for me. But I think doing your own research and asking around, if you're familiar with people that maybe, you are aware that they're seeing somebody, ask them how their therapist is or what treatments they're using. And you mentioned EMDR, and I know EMDR is getting a lot of good, traction with some of the first responders that I've, interacted with. They say, EMDR saved my life and stuff like that. But if EMDR isn't for you, try another modality. I just think there's so much out there that anybody that is feeling that they're stuck or they're, in a certain way, that there's so much help out there. They just have to, we have to be willing to get rid of that stigma that me asking for help or me asking for support is a sign of weakness. Obviously you have to show some vulnerability to do that. And I think it's tough for those of us in this field, to be vulnerable. But I found that after starting to share my story, as a webinar or as a conference, training, and then being on different platforms like this, it took a lot of vulnerability, but that vulnerability is now my strength, and that kind of anchors my resiliency in moving forward. And and I think anybody that's in need or feels that they maybe need to talk to someone for that support, I think it will be a great experience when they do allow themselves to be vulnerable, and understanding that vulnerability is a show of strength.
There is healing value in telling our stories. That was the first step in my healing journey, was being asked to tell my story in a public way. And I there is a lot of vulnerability to that. As a survivor, it wasn't even my first responder stories, which I have a number of those, but being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse was the open door for me. Like my adverse childhood experiences was where my healing began, and it was easier to talk about that and the humiliation that goes along with that than it was for me to admit as a first responder that I had moments that I couldn't get out of my head. So, I had all these other things I could blame it on that came before that. It wasn't the car accident or the 2-year-old that got run over by his parents. And, it wasn't those moments, but the nightmares, the dreams, the flashbacks, whatever you want to call them, all of those things that were haunting me were really related more to my experiences later. So it took a lot of healing of the old stuff to get to where I was comfortable saying, okay, yes, this lifestyle, this work is something that I need help with too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also mentioned something I think a lot of people don't know. the sensory stimuli that smells go straight to the amygdala, which is your fight flight response. So your immediate trauma response, you're going to react faster to smells and more intensely to smells than you do to like memories and visual stimuli and that kind of thing. So we often talk about like the smell of copper or the smell of sulfur or this, like there are certain trigger smells that will put you back in the moment so intensely. Like, and I don't think the general public that hasn't experienced it understands that it's palpable. Like you feel the sensations of the heat or the grit or the whatever it is you're experiencing. Those memories are so powerful that you literally feel the sensations of wind on your face, and whatever happened to be there is there 100%. And it's very re-traumatizing. So it's not just like a nightmare or a dream or, oh, I can't get this memory out of my head. It's literally a visceral whole body experience. So for those that are like, well, what's the big deal? Oh, you're having some nightmares. Oh, you can't let go of some situations. It is so much deeper and bigger and stronger than that. And a little bit of compassion. Don't feel sorry for us. Don't feel like you need to, look at us like there's something broken about us. But a little bit of compassion and acceptance that we are human and that we suffer, and that spending our whole lives trying to ease your suffering has a price. It has a cost, and that first responders pay that willingly, but we need the community to step up a little bit and to open the door for the conversation that it is okay for us to be just human, and it's okay for us to be raw and exposed and vulnerable, and to say that hurts, and to say that was unacceptable, and to admit that sometimes people are crappy and that we don't like that.
Right.
But we can't just look at every situation in every moment with brand new fresh eyes and go, oh, this situation is brand new. No, we come with all these experiences, so our reactions are based on what we know. Our reactions are based on everything that's happened before. So if we're a little short-tempered with a domestic situation, or if we're a little quicker to draw the gun because the last 10 times we got on a call, our life was in danger and we had to pull it, or we had to run after someone, or we had to, evade being hit by another car. Like those responses add up and they're built into our system. You can't just stop all that. So every single moment for a first responder is a culmination of a lifetime of giving and donating parts of themselves to the community. And if the community could just see that with honesty and with a little bit of empathy, I think we would all be better off.
Yeah, I agree. And, to bring it full circle, like I said, it was a couple of years ago. So, when I worked at the Department of Corrections, my first job, it was grant funded. That money went away. So I was going to be out of a job. And, so I started applying, and, and I was getting interviews and stuff, but I wasn't feeling right, because I got to work. It's just me and my lovely wife, we're empty nesters, but, it was a downward spiral. And luckily, thank goodness for my lovely wife, because she was like, look, if you're not working when your grant position is over, we're good. And I finally, I thanked her for that. And I had to sit back and say, you know what? I have been in worse situations than this. I'm living in a house. My wife is working. She's telling me we're good. And that's when I came up with, the after action review that I did in the military quite a few times. I just added another R. So instead of after action review, I came up with accept, acknowledge, respond appropriately versus react negatively. And then the last R is reach out. So the first thing I had to AAR was my dad's death. So I had to accept that, my dad passed many, many years ago. I had to acknowledge that he had a great impact on me, even if it was only for 18 years. I had to respond appropriately. And I felt that was sharing my story, which kind of shares his story. And then I had to reach out, and that was seeking help and that support to make sure that that downward spiral did not continue. So I just kind of apply that to other situations. Like my lovely wife and I, our son is is transgender, and I had to AAR that, so I had to accept the fact that that's how my son chooses to live. I had to acknowledge that I don't understand, but I'm going to be a loving parent because that is still my child. I had to respond appropriately by looking at, his life now and how that is going to mature now that he's just graduated college. And I had to reach out, and to reach out was seeking training, getting as much information about being an ally and things like that, because I it's something very new to me. And so I applied that AAR method to that situation, and, relationship is great. He's off doing great things. And I think he understands that both, not just me, but my lovely wife, we are there. We are still his parents, his mom and dad, and, and we're going to move forward. And those are some of the life situations that first responders and military go through. We're human, just like you said, we're people too. And we have life situations outside of, critical incidents that are going to affect us as well. And I think a lot of times people don't see that. They only see the uniform or the badge and, oh, well, nothing bad happened to you, or, you don't experience divorce or death of a child or anything like that. And I think it's, like you said, it's just putting the cover on it that we are people too, and we're humans, and we have to go through stuff just like everybody else.
Absolutely. So your process is a powerful tool for problem solving and for processing grief and for, analyzing pretty much any situation. It can be applied to just about anything. And that brings our attention to how important it is to have a set of tools and resources that you can practice and habituate so that when you need them, they come up really easily. So this is kind of one of the things that we're trying to do here, is to create a lot of early education, to empower people with a set of tools and resources that are scientifically validated and proven to be effective in trauma situations and problem solving situations and stress and anxiety situations. And it's really great to have someone talk about how useful a tool can be, because in reality, that's very simple, right? It's 4 little letters, 4 little words that you just go, okay, stop, think, don't react. What are my choices? Choose the best one and move forward. It gives you a moment to pause and reflect and to just go, okay, look, I'm not going to react. I'm just going to let me go through the steps. And those steps are so practiced for you that even in the highest stress situations, it's probably really easy now to just go, okay, pause, go through my steps. This is my process. This is my process. This is how I do this. And people who are trained, military especially, have a tendency to respond extremely well to these types of systems because it lets you have an automatic break. It gives you that this is the system, this is the rules, this is the procedure. I do things by the book. This is my procedure. So instead of talking about all the gushy mushy, be vulnerable stuff, we can go in and talk in a language that you're comfortable with and set up some systems that really work for you before you're in a crisis, before the downward spiral. And ultimately, I think that's the part that our community at large is missing, is that we can't do the backwards thing. We can't work from after people are struggling and after people are suffering and after people are diagnosed. We need to start at the beginning and build these resources and give people these tools. And those tools aren't even mental health, really. Do we really need to say that it's, help?
Right.
It's just systems.
Yep.
It's just policy. It's just what we do. It's
Yeah.
normal, natural, and
Yep.
functional. It's functionality.
Yeah. Because I'm a simple guy,
That's the thing, this whole puzzle, everyone's like, "We can't solve this. It's too big. It's too messy. It's too ugly." That's so much bullshit. I just gotta call that. It's just pure bullshit because it's very simple. What we need to do is very simple. It's not easy,
Right.
but it is simple. And we've known what to do for a long time. None of this stuff is mysterious or new or magical. We know what emotional intelligence, we know how to set up emotional intelligence frameworks. We know how to set up problem solving frameworks. We know how to set up stress reduction frameworks. All of this stuff exists. It's not anything new and special and magical. We just need to use it.
Right. Yeah, and I think part of it is breaking down those barriers and addressing that stigma of asking for help. And a lot of people think, well, I don't want to talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Well, great, then don't. Find a coach, find a LCSW or LMFT, whatever it is. All the initials are out there.
Right? There are a lot.
There's somebody, or join the American Legion and go to a meeting, and maybe you'll hear somebody that shares something that resonates with you, and it's all about connection. I think we have to feel that we're connected to what we are seeking to help us or support us, and that's why I think podcasts like this are great, because it gets the word out. Because somebody may be listening and say, well, that guy sounds like a knucklehead, but I kind of get what he's saying. And if it's not regular, I don't know what normal therapy, find somebody else. And because I think the resources are out there. A lot of times it's just taking that first step, and it was hard for me. It took me decades, until I finally said, you know what, I gotta. I mean, I was very confident in my job and my skills, and I was just surviving until I finally made that step to ask for support.
It's hard for first responders to recognize that they're worthy of happiness, that they deserve more and better every single day.
Right. Yeah, because we want to make other people's lives more and better and safe. And I'll just suck it up. And we got to lose that mentality. And it was difficult. It's hard. I mean, it's extremely hard for me. And I think that's why my body is reacting the way it is with some of my medical issues. But I'm excited to see how the relationship with my, I call her my counselor lady, with the counselor lady continues to grow. I'm already seeing some stuff and identifying things that, and really processing my grief and stuff with my dad's situation is probably the biggest thing that we're addressing now. And, it's good. I'm good to go. I look forward to my sessions, and, I'm glad I finally took that step and reached out for support.
I'm proud of you. I know that sounds really cheesy, but
No, I get it.
It's easy to stop after the first session because, they're asking you questions you're not super comfortable with. They want to pick all of those scabs off that you've been so careful to put over your wounds. But if you don't take the scabs off, you can't get the infection out. And that's really what it is. We're full of these pockets of infection, and we have to pull those scabs off. We have to open up the wounds so that we can clean them out. And that can be ugly and painful but it's more painful to just sit with them festering inside of us. It's more painful to just allow them to eat us up from the inside out. So you'll have an ugly scar, but it will remind you of how far you've come.
Absolutely.
And how strong you really are, because strong is holding yourself up, making yourself the best you that you can be, because helpers, healers, first responders, military, we all want to spend our lives just giving to other people and rescuing other people. But if you're wounded, if you're weak, if you're vulnerable, if you're not pouring from a full cup, a cup that's overflowing, then you're doing a disservice to the people you're trying to help, because you're not as fast as you could be. You're not thinking on your feet. You're not capable of coming up with the solutions that you need to come up with. You're not your best. So you're not serving them in the way that they deserve to be served. So for all of you guys out there who are like, well, I'm just going to tough it out, I can just do another 5 years. If you're in your head, if you're sweating, if you're having a hard time going to work in the morning, these are hesitations. These are moments when you're not able to respond as quickly as you need to. These are things that are not only detrimental to you, but to those that you want to serve. So if it's in your head that you just have to take care of people and you have to serve them, and that's your job and that's what you're in it for, then do that to the best of your ability by taking care of yourself first. So if it helps you to put it on someone else, to say it's not about me, it's about them, if that helps you get help, if that helps you take the step to learn the things you need to learn to be healthy and whole and together, then use that. Let that be your reason. If that's what gets you through the door, if that's what gets you to move forward, because whether it's about you or whether it's about them, it has to change. And somebody has to be strong enough to stand up and say, this is my story. This is what I went through. And this is what it looks like now. And if I would have asked for help 40 years ago, if I would have got these resources 40 years ago, imagine the life I could have lived. Imagine the lives I could have saved. Imagine how amazing things could have been. So for every day you wait, for every day you suffer, for every day you struggle, your brother or sister on the force next to you is waiting for someone to show them that it's okay. They're waiting for someone to say, are you okay? They're waiting for someone to notice that they're wounded too, and that they need someone to support them. And they may not be strong enough to take that step forward yet. So if you can do it, you can help them do it too. So for every one of you that takes that step forward openly and says, hey, this is my journey, come with me on this journey, every single one of you creates that tidal wave that we're looking for, that transformation of this stigma, this change that we need to see happen, because even one life lost to suicide is too many. And I can't pick up my phone a single day and not have an announcement to our Ferryman project that serves the families of the fallen. I can't get up a single morning and not have like 5 to 7 emails in there of families seeking help, of families looking to honor someone who was lost, who's not going to be on those memorial walls, who's not going to be remembered the same way as other people who are in the line of duty. And that's just too much. It's not necessary. We can do better. We need to do better.
Absolutely.
Every life matters.
Yes, absolutely.
To make it just like on a
Yeah.
t-shirt. Every life matters.
Excellent.
So what would you say, like, what's your last closing statement to the folks out there?
I think it's like I mentioned a little bit ago, I think we all understand that it takes a great deal of courage to become vulnerable, or to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to share your story, or to reach out for that support. But I think we need to see that vulnerability is our strength, and the strength is going to help anchor our resilience and keep us moving forward.
Thank you so much for being here with us. I say tonight because this will be released at 7:00 in the evening. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight on our 50th episode, and stay in touch.
Absolutely.
And anything you need, I'm here for you.
Thank you.
So again, that was Daniel Torrez, and he has such an amazing story of standing up, telling his story, and you can see him at first responder conferences, at training seminars, and all kinds of other wonderful places. So do look up his social media if you want to talk to him or if you have questions, or connect with me, and I will uh, forward that message to him. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us on this, our 50th episode. If you would like to support Battle to Be, our 501c3 organization that serves those who serve country and community through PTSD, preparation, prevention, resilience, and recovery resources, or our Ferryman project that serves families of the fallen never forgotten, through our Memorial Jeep, Phoenix, and attendance at memorial services to represent especially those who are not on those memorial uh, walls and plaques outside of the organizations. We want to hold space for those who have died not in the line of duty, and that doesn't necessarily mean suicide. We have served some who had domestic violence situations and lost their lives outside of the line of duty. We've had automobile accidents and cancer and other significant illnesses. So we just want to make sure that the light of our individuals' service is not diminished by their cause of death, and that they are remembered with the honor and respect that they earned and that they deserve for what they have given to their communities. So if you have someone that you would like us to honor, go to battle2be.org, and you can see right below how Battle to Be is spelled. And if you would like to contribute to our program, you can do that at the website as well. Or you can push the support this podcast button down below. 100% of proceeds in either location do go to our end users and to developing our programs and providing those resources to our military and first responders. And we do serve also other helping professionals. So that would be our dispatchers and our EMTs and medics, emergency room staff, doctors, nurses, flight nurses, crime scene. People like to forget them. All of those folks who take care of the aftermath of incidents and accidents, tow truck drivers, all of these folks and so many more. So just message us if you are struggling and you would like resources, if you would like to join one of our online courses, one of our coaching and consulting programs. Let us know. We do often have scholarships available. So if it's outside of your budget to receive these services that you need, please let us know. No one fights alone and no one's left behind. We will take care of what needs to be taken care of. We serve families as well. So if you are a Leo wife or a military wife or husband, whatever the situation, if your family member is struggling with post-traumatic or occupational stress, please let us know. We have a camp, a retreat coming up in October, which is a communication and relationship camp. So we're going to be working on giving people foundational skills for their marriage and for supporting their partner who's struggling with occupational stress. And we have room in that camp for 30 individuals. So we are also looking for corporate sponsors who would like their names on that camp and would like to be involved in our marketing, and who would like to make sure that our families do not have to pay to come and have that weekend to get away, to relax, and to gain really important skills to save first responder and frontline marriages. There is up to as much of an 80% divorce rate in these fields. Our folks are more likely to be divorced and to be divorced multiple times than the general population. And it's very significant. So this is something that we'd like to get underneath and see if we can't build some foundation for some stronger communication and understanding in these relationships. So please do, if you feel like supporting that, let us know. If you'd like to attend that, also just go to the website. All the information is there, or you can email at battle2be@yahoo.com. So again, thank you so much for being here at our 50th episode, and we look forward to bringing you our next guest in the next 3 days.